Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Imagine Your Future podcast. I'm joined by my usual partner in crime, Karen Collyer. And Karen, before we even get started, you and I have not had a conversation, and sometimes I think we've gone and done our solo act. So great to be back together. How are you?
Thanks, Steve. I'm super excited to be back. It feels like it's been a long time since you and I have been doing this together. And today, I'm really excited to be talking with you, Doug Glair, who's our Director of Cybersecurity, so we can pick his brain on all things cybersecurity.
Excellent. Karen and Steve, thank you so much for having me on. Really excited to talk a topic that I'm quite passionate about. How do we protect the companies, the enterprise, and each of us, both at work and at home, from a cybersecurity perspective?
So as one of our resident cybersecurity experts at ISG, there's a few of you rolling around. What do you think, like the top 5 threats are facing both organizations and individuals, as you said today? What's out there that we need to be wary of?
So when I think about the threats, I almost put them in a couple buckets. One, we have the actors themselves. We're all hearing, unfortunately, about everything going on from nation-state actors and what are these large global governments doing themselves and or supporting attacks and or research, whether it's trying to steal intellectual property or damage infrastructure. I mean, that's from a global perspective. That's sort of parlaying into cybercrime as a service. I mean, it is a business, and these entities, the criminals, are now starting to sell their services to each other. So it's not like we're just dealing with each individual one. They have a network just like we do in terms of sharing intelligence, sharing tactics. So it's growing as that service. And then on the other side, when I think about the protections against those attackers, there's so many facets. We've got the human element. 82% of cyber incidents involve a human-based decision that enabled it to happen. So we're trying to protect and educate ourselves of how and what's going on. We've got third-party risks like the recent MOVEit vulnerabilities. So you've constantly got this evolving threat that is getting more and more sophisticated, with at the same time trying to protect and design your own capabilities and maintain them. So it's a constant battle on both sides.
What does a human-based decision mean, Doug? Can you give us some examples of what that means and maybe what enterprises do or we as individuals could do to curtail that?
Absolutely. So we think about from a human perspective, one of the easiest or most prevalent entry points into organizations or even for us at home are those email-based compromises, whether you have a phishing attack where somebody is tricked into clicking on a link or opening an attachment, or worse yet, going to a website that looks legitimate and they're putting in username and password credentials. All of those are entry points to, even during an incident, a human decision to take an action that may have actually further enabled the adversary to further dig in or move around because they could see it coming, and in the research, they could see the activities going on earlier. So when we look at the human side, some of the actions that we all take is, one, educating our employees, our team members, our partners around cybersecurity. But unfortunately, sort of the one-size-fits-all training that we've all gone through it's become stale. It's become only effective to a certain level. So one of the sort of new emerging capabilities is to have that education focus on the individual themselves and their own risk persona so that they better understand how they make decisions themselves, and thus the training around cyber gets personalized to who they are and their decisions process so that it's that much more effective. So we're trying to almost build in greater intelligence into how we educate our team members so that they are a more effective piece of the protection layer.
If you've listened to any of the last few episodes of the podcast or talked to Steve at all for any length of time in the last, 6 months or so, you've probably talked and heard a lot about AI. And one of the things that I've been wondering is how AI is disrupting cybersecurity. And it could be a disruption that's, great. It's to everyone's good. Or, mentioning your bad actors before, it could be something that increases more threats. What is the impact of AI on cybersecurity, and what are you having to deal with when talking to our clients, as an example?
So Karen, definitely, AI is here. It's here to stay, and it's going to continue to grow and play on both sides of that. It is helping organizations bring better business value to their customers, innovate faster, improve their cyber programs even. The latest statistics from the IBM security breach report was that companies that had AI-based responses were able to reduce their time to identify and remediate a breach from 200 days to reducing that by 74 days and saving about $3 million. So AI can be a huge benefit to cyber. On the other side, as we talked about the adversaries, they are using AI as well to improve their techniques and tactics. It's also opening up doors for those adversaries that may not be as technically savvy, because AI is helping augment that. So we've got to embrace it on one side of how do we improve our cyber capabilities and our capabilities of our companies, while at the other hand, be aware that the adversaries are using the same capabilities and they're investing in it to speed their ability to improve the effectiveness and the frequency of attacks.
Yeah, I think you're right, Doug. The piece that I've seen that's really interesting is just within the SOC, using AI to really correlate incidents and common things. And what's fascinating right now is a lot of incidents can be covered where they don't appear to be the same, but with AI, we're seeing the similarities so we can get to the root cause much faster. I think you talked about this at the SICE Summit not a couple of weeks ago. What's your sense of how, I'll just call it AI ops, is going to be integrated into security operations centers going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. We cannot just have eyes on glass trying to identify what's going on, try to manually respond to it when the attackers are using computer speed to execute their events. It's got to be taking millions upon millions of data elements, identifying where the commonality is, identifying recommended actions, and having a level, you got to test it out in the level of trust that response through AI support can be automated at machine speed for those things that are more common. You may not do that for a critical server response. You may want to have it recommend and then a human quickly make a decision, yes, that makes sense, so that you don't automatically shut down an entire enterprise. But absolutely, we've got to generate and use AI at speed to handle the amount of volume of data that we're all trying to sift through.
Yeah, you could almost imagine, though, where you could use that as a new attack vector, though, similar to a DDoS, where you could send false signals through, hoping the AI takes an action without human intervention that shuts down a server, that gives them access point and everything. It's going to be, the number of threat vectors that are out there for these things is just multiplying.
Exactly. And making sure as you're developing and as companies develop those capabilities, that's the value of sandboxing and value of being able to test these, be able to run them through those scenarios, and also share the lessons learned across companies and within industries. I think we've got to continue to grow. You're hearing more and more about public-private data sharing and things, but it's not just about the threat intelligence, but it's about the new methods and tactics with AI that have become beneficial. We've got to be more open within the cyber community on sharing those lessons learned, is my view.
Yeah, it makes us better threat hunters, right? As well as being able to analyze the things that have happened and where the attacks are occurring and all that kind of stuff. We can be a little more proactive, I think, than we were previously.
Karen, I think that's a new Netflix series.
Threat hunters?
Love it.
I didn't know how else to say it. I have another question about, not as recent of a phenomena as AI, but, a couple of years ago, we had the pandemic and there was a big shift for users to, if not a full work at home solution, then a hybrid solution. And I think that probably introduced some additional cybersecurity risk too. So what are organizations doing to deal with maybe work from home workplaces that aren't as secure from a network perspective, or even, preventing the threats of someone attacking my fridge or any other smart enabled technology or device that I may have? What can companies do to eliminate those kinds of risks?
Yeah, I think we've all gone through this major change over the last 3.5 years. I know for myself, this is the first time I've really worked from home for any extended period of time. And it was a big transition. Companies were immediately scrambling because maybe they only had 10% of their knowledge workers that could work from home enabled with the right laptops or the right VPN connections and the right bandwidth to support all of that. So there was a very quick, rapid emergence of that. Now what we're seeing, and I think the best way to approach that is what we call SASE, the Secure Access Service Edge sort of service. So imagine that for your company, your laptops are automatically connected to the SASE service provider. You're automatically knowing and validating that it's on a network that you feel comfortable with, or it's tunneling through. You're automatically validating the identity of the user and device, and based upon where they're going and what type of transaction, you're confirming that that is something you want to authorize, which sort of lends SASE and this concept of zero trust no one, together. So it's actually, and you'll laugh that for once, security, networking, and user experience are all improving through the implementation of a capability versus security having the viewpoint of being Mr. and Mrs. No. So I'm a huge advocate of implementing a SASE service, having that be the connection for those remote users into an environment, and then you're able to enhance through that service your visibility, your monitoring, and your policy controls so that they're always on versus only on if somebody's in an office.
I think that's a great point, Doug. And I think the multi-factor authentication components actually are building a much higher degree of trust with individuals as well when they go. And that it is even as you travel and we go, all over the world and different things, having that security is nice, or getting the notification. It's sort of so common now for the consumer experience and the enterprise experience that it works. And Karen, I think we have our first two characters for our new movie as well. So Threat Hunter starring Mr. and Mrs. No.
Trust no one.
Absolutely.
Could be our tagline. Huh.
Yeah.
Doug, what as a cybersecurity guy, what keeps you awake at night? Like, what are the things that you're thinking about? Oh shoot, this is coming, or this is happening now. What are we going to do? What things are on the horizon?
I think what keeps me up at night, one, it's for those companies that either haven't fully understood the true criticality and the importance. A company that doesn't have a CISO in place, that just says, well, cyber is embedded into my IT group, they'll cover it. They've not fully embraced it at the board level. I mean, cyber is not just the role of a chief information security officer or the CISO. It is a corporate responsibility and need. And it's those companies that haven't fully taken that on or embraced it, that those are the ones that I worry about, because it is all of our data that's out there. They're handling it, whether it's for retail or whether it's for technology. So it's those ones that I would love to see continue to grow the maturity of their program. That's sort of the ones that I worry about the most.
That's a really, it's a good thought, Doug, as you go through that, and it is absolutely a board level. I think when I think of some of the threat vectors, though, the ones that concern me are the things like SolarWinds, where you have a threat vector come in from SaaS software or something else in your broader ecosystem. That's really difficult. And if you look at all the companies that were impacted by those types of breaches, how do you see that evolving, and what are the types of things that enterprises can do to protect themselves when the SaaS product or an install product is really the source?
No, Steve, great point. That, I mean, the reliance upon third parties and third party cyber risks continues to grow significantly. SolarWinds, great example. The latest on Progress Software with the Move It vulnerabilities. It comes back to, one, do you understand and know who your third parties are? Do you have a good inventory of them? Do you know how they're connected to your network and or what software you're using? And where is your patching level and for handling those vulnerabilities? Because many of the recent incidents that have happened, the patches were available. Companies just weren't applying them fast enough and prioritizing them. And so that's a known open vulnerability that attackers are using and probing when you had a lock that you could put on and close it, and people just hadn't applied it yet. So definitely having a very strong, robust third-party risk management program and being able to respond to those risks quickly is a critical piece now to any cyber program.
Yeah, I think that's one of the frustrating parts from a executive leadership position is when you think about some of the cyber crimes that are taking place, it's not really the super sleuthy things that are getting through. It's the easy things, as you mentioned,
yep.
Right? The phishing attacks or the email or, I need some money sent to me. Can you automatically update my account? And the silly ones, and the basics of patch management, IO ops, AI ops, et cetera, coming through, kind of bringing it back to AI again. I hope we get to the point where some of those can be much more automatically done, and the patching is much more aligned, because it is easy to miss these today. Any thoughts?
No, it absolutely is easy to miss them. It comes back to a prioritization within companies. Quite often we'll see that, and I've seen this myself, where a portion of the program was fully funded, built the cyber program, built this ability to scan and discover vulnerabilities, but they actually didn't invest in the infrastructure side or the cloud side to make sure they could execute what was needed on that side for the patches, for the remediation, for the response. So there became this level of inequity within the organization that was almost as detrimental as not having the vulnerability visibility itself. So finding that right balance and prioritizing the reduction of the risks within the organization as part of the holistic program and view is so critical to the success of a cyber protection across an entire company.
I've been wondering about access control. I know, a few years ago, one of the biggest problems in making organizations less secure was just simple access control. Has that improved, or is that something that, again, we can really use AI for to make sure that people have the right rights and everything that's supposed to be turned off is turned off, and without having to go through, formal auditing too much of the time. I don't know how to say that, but you know what I mean? Again and again and again.
Absolutely, Karen. So what you're leading to is the introduction over the last few years of this zero trust philosophy and framework, which builds upon the historical least privilege access requirements. So yes, every application, you have your normal, who are the users, what are the roles they're authorized to do, what levels of, if I'm a procurement official, what level of signing authority do I have in the system? All those are still there. But now with zero trust, instead of that being authorized once I'm in the system and I maintain it, and I inherently have that access throughout my session, now that goes all the way back to every transaction that I'm doing being validated that I not only have the identity I need, but I'm on a network that is authorized for that transaction. I'm on a device that should be allowed and is available for that transaction. I'm the right user. And all of that put together is giving in context to the transaction that is being authorized. So, and as Stephen had talked about earlier, multi-factor authentication in. So once you put that in place, it doesn't harm the user experience because they're still interacting the same way, but all the logic behind it, the AI that's validating that, is constantly checking and making sure nothing has been hijacked midway through that session.
Man, there's a lot of components in that chain, isn't there?
So what you're telling me, it's going to be harder now to hack my Amazon account than it was 2 years ago, the last time,
Karen, I have full confidence that all the cyber education that you've taken has definitely increased that knowledge and protection.
That's funny.
I don't know, Doug. I saw her profile from the other security. She's a risk taker.
You're a risk taker.
Yes.
So, Doug, I think I got two more questions. The first one is really the impact of quantum. So I think we're close, or at least some people say we're close to really having 256-bit encryption being able to be broke, essentially. And with quantum, we're rethinking the entire security paradigm. I've talked to a large number of startups. There's lots of different ways to think through this. Some are thinking about getting completely away from the public key, repackaging data packets, everything else separately. What's sort of your sense on the impact of quantum first? And then after that, I want to explore a little bit about how you feel about ransomware, but not from the vulnerabilities, but the sense of paying. So let's unpack quantum a little bit first.
So quantum's definitely the next big unveiling of new thinking and stuff that we're not even sure yet how it's going to fully evolve. But what scares me from a quantum perspective, as you said, is data breaches from 4 or 5 years ago, where the attackers got access to encrypted data, may have downloaded it, but everybody looked at it and said, well, it's encrypted. They couldn't really get access to it. They couldn't expose it. So part of our protection in depth worked. As quantum becomes a reality, like you're saying, all of a sudden things from 4 or 5 years ago are now exposed or could be exposed. And how are companies going to respond to that and deal with it to say, well, yeah, we had this incident. It technically at that time wasn't a breach because they couldn't do anything with the data. And now all of a sudden it is. So you almost have retroactive security breaches being rediscussed and discovered. So that I think is something I won't say nobody, but I think we're going to have to think more about when that becomes a reality on the quantum side. And then from how do you use quantum and capabilities to protect, very similar to AI, that's going to be new evolutions in the crypto standards, new evolutions in how the speed at which you can calculate activities, all of that is, I think, in the next 2 years, 2 to 3, we're going to see a lot of change in the cyber space as that becomes more and more practical.
I would agree. I think some of the paradigms that we know now are going to shift rapidly. And I really like your perspective on all the data that could be in the darkest corners of the dark web today or filed away that aren't breakable. And I think they say it would take 75 years or more to do with today's computing power that could be hours. But some of that could be, incredibly damaging, not only to national security and enterprises, but, it wasn't that long ago that the Sony situation where the embarrassment, the reputational risk, all of that comes out. And that's harder to say, I'm sorry if some of those come out. So you're absolutely correct. I'm not quite sure there's a good way to get that data or to safeguard at this point. Which brings me really to ransomware. What's if you're working with a client and they really had a ransomware attack and they're being held up and it's clearly being held up with mission critical systems or critical data, what advice do you give them and how do you help, how do you hold their hand during that situation?
Yeah. So first off, I would say the ideal advice is plan early, plan often, and plan well in advance. This is where, the whole concept of having a resiliency plan in place that has been tested, practiced, refined, and I specifically say a resiliency plan that covers both the IT infrastructure capabilities, recovery, but also the business continuity piece that says, what is the business going to do? How is it going to operate? How is it going to recover data that could be lost during or impacted during a cybersecurity incident, ransomware event, disruption, etc.? So companies that build that, practice it, refine it, and have that part of their normal playbooks are significantly able to respond in a more positive manner and actually make a ransomware attack seem like a non-event because they were ready for it and had all the capabilities in place. For those that have not, then you're really looking at, and quite frankly, bringing in the experts to say, one, what are our options? What can we rebuild? How quick? What is the loss of business data that from the point the ransomware started, how far back in the backups were they able to get into to apply? From a paying for the ransom, coming out of my background from a federal perspective, the answer would always be no, because even for companies that have paid for it, it doesn't mean that they've gotten access to the data any faster. Many times they may give a key that partially works, and you still, even if you did pay and you got access, you still have to completely rebuild your environment and systems to make sure that they're no longer in there and they haven't retained a footprint. So payment, in my view, should not be an option. And definitely, if it's even being considered, really have to understand the ramifications of it.
So what's the average cost of attack, a ransomware attack, and the average recovery time?
So when we look at the latest stats I've looked at, average cost for a breach across the world is about $4.5 million. The US is actually almost twice that at just over 9 million. And I would say the average time from breach to remediation right now is sitting at right around 200 days. So these are not inexpensive activities. They are not things that happen overnight, but the adversaries are doing their surveillance. They're getting in, they're making decisions as to when they make themselves known and take action. So it's definitely, that's why the resiliency piece and planning for it, those companies that do that are able to reduce both of those vectors on time and cost.
Ooh, those are big numbers.
I think I was thinking the same, Karen. We're both, I didn't realize the average was 8 million. I knew they were big, but I think your advice, Doug, is absolutely spot on. Wow. I guess there's a straightforward ROI on the investment in cybersecurity.
It is. And don't forget, those numbers are just the remediation, response remediation. That doesn't include then the investment that's going to happen afterwards to rebuild and improve the program so it doesn't happen again. So you're right. It is better to make the right investments, evaluate your security posture, prioritize where you have risks and where you need to make the investments so that you're minimizing those costs in the likelihood that it does happen.
Yeah, to go back to what you were saying about what keeps you up at night and, organizations that don't have a CISO or a good remediation plan. Just listening to you makes me realize that even if you have a CISO, this conversation needs to be elevated to the board in every board meeting so that you have a consistent, a cohesive cyber strategy right from the very top down in the organization, really, so that you're as protected as possible.
Absolutely. And I think this is why we're seeing more and more regulations require and place a requirement on the board to be aware and understand what their cyber posture and cyber risk is. It's not just one board member. It's not just one C-suite member. It is all of them understanding where they play the role and asking those questions, asking the questions. What's our confidence level? What's our response plan? Do we have a communication strategy? Are we ready? Who would communicate to the press? Who would communicate to our customers? All of those things, companies that talk about that, practice it and refine it, once again, are the ones that doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but they're going to minimize the impact to their employees, their customers, their brand, and the financial by having those conversations and elevating it to the right level as you've discussed.
Well, I think this is a good place to leave it. Steve, you good?
I think this was a fantastic conversation. Any last words from you, Doug?
Just really thank you as well for helping facilitate the conversation and keeping it front of mind. I don't want people to think of cyber and be fearful. It's a part of everyday business now, but it's something that also can't be put to the back burner. And I think that's the key is to continue the prioritization and activities within the companies, both that support us at work and at home.
Karen, you want to take us home?
Yeah. Thanks again, Doug, for keeping this top of mind. I think it's a really important topic, and I hope we have more discussions with you in the coming months, because I think it's, from an interest perspective, people are just going to continue to engage. So I'm going to reserve you now for a welcome back guest. In terms of wrapping us up, as usual, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. As always, if you are interested in what you heard and you want to hear more, you can go to the website at www.isg-one, that's -one.com/podcasts, and you can access the catalog of Imagine Your Future episodes. And you can also pick us up and stream us from your favorite podcasting app. Thanks again for lending us your ears, and until next time.